Hello and welcome. I want to talk about some of your comments and some of the questions here for discussion. Beginning with, I met a sister recently. We were talking about suffering and karma, and she asked me a question. If this is all true, then why should a child suffer? Why should she beg to release her from suffering? Why this needs to happen to children? So that's the first part of two questions. And I would imagine your sister, or the sister, I'm not sure whether you meant by relation or she was a nun, meant that if it's a child, how can it have generated bad karma to be in such a position? Well, of course, the answer to that is from previous lifetimes, previous lives. Our rebirth is very much determined by our actions of body, speech and mind, that our karma in this life, not only our next moment of existence that we will experience, but then on, if we're to be reborn and not freed from samsara, freed from suffering within this lifetime, will continue that karma into future rebirth. This is the whole principle of karma and rebirth, that it is carried forward from our actions of body, speech and mind in the present moment. It is the present moment that we can take immediate action with, by ensuring we are keeping sila, the precepts, and practicing the Noble Eightfold Path. So this suffering in general will afflict all people, all beings, in fact, of all ages. There are as many children suffering as there are perhaps children in very comfortable and even luxurious existences. But everyone, all beings, will experience suffering. And this teachings of the Buddha, the Dharma, that we are practicing, is to become free from suffering in this lifetime by the realization of its cause. Not by asking or wishing or begging for that suffering to be relieved, or for us to be released from what might seem a trap in which we are suffering, but to practice now in the present moment in order to generate the causes and conditions that will be conducive to a better future, whether it is in the next moment or in future lives, rebirth. And then you go on to say that in Thailand recently, many of the monks were offering rituals such as flower baths, yarn for people to hold and chant, and does this have any particular meaning? Yes, there are all kinds of additional and optional extras applied to the practice culturally that have been picked up along the way as Buddhism, the practice, moved out geographically from its central hub of northeast India, where it was established. The Buddha wouldn't have been offering flower water or the cord break. What do we call this? These forgotten the term. You can tell I don't do this very often. So when chanting, often the monks will have this long piece of cord that is held by all of the monks in order of seniority. It's tied around the Buddha's rupa often, and then held by all of the monks and then all of the lay people. It's a symbolic action of connection it's, rather than all holding hands, for instance, in a circle, they're connected by this rope. And then afterwards it's cut up, and then a monk will tie it around the lay practitioner's wrists as something to significantly remind them. And it's called blessing string or blessing cord or braid or something like that, because the blessings that have been said are apparently invoked upon this, but it really is just symbolic, and its meaning can be taken as a way of mindfully remembering that you were there and that happened. And as it wears out, gets dirty and frays, perhaps it also reminds you you need to go back to the temple to do this whole thing again. So you're visiting the temple regularly, practicing the acts of devotion that are there in these temples, of offering lights, candles, flowers, incense, again, all symbolic, to add a little substance to our reflections on the qualities of the Buddha in our chanting, the reflections on the qualities of the Dharma and of those of the Sangha. And also, when we recite the teachings of the Buddha in this chanting, we're reflecting upon those core aspects of this practice. And these are just good and valuable, in fact, valuable, yes, reminders. But the specifics of them don't matter so much as to your attendance and your practice of sitting, listening, absorbing, and perhaps meditating, and maybe offering some form of generosity by way of dana when you visit. It's also something the monks can give back to you, because we don't have anything other than the Dharma to offer and teaching. So not all monks wish to or are able to do that, and prefer perhaps to remain silent, but would like to give you something, and a piece of string is something to give. Okay. Now someone describes here, I won't read out the whole description, but apparently in America there are special places called anger outlets where people go to smash things up and break things with crowbars, like plates and all sorts of things. Breaking plates with hammers and using chainsaws, and all of this stuff to express your anger. And this is coming from my talk about anger and how to deal with it. And your question is this a good idea, that you're providing us, these outlets, anger outlets, are providing a safe place to let go of this anger? No, it's not a good idea, because as I said, we don't let go, we can't let go of our anger by letting it out. It's coming from within, and the more we let it out, we will get a sense of euphoria, satisfaction. Some of these, I don't know, endorphins or whatever hormones it is, will be created that you will want to feel again, experience again, and each time more so. So the reason these are retail anger outlets is because they're probably very profitable. If someone goes to a place and smashes lots of stuff up, they're going to want to do it again. Now, do you want to encourage that in yourself, in your body, in your mind, in your mental emotions and physical feelings of that kind of satisfaction? Or do you want to find a way to establish a kind of peace and harmony with the world, whereby you develop equanimity and have compassion for that, even yourself, that makes you angry, and are able to just settle with things as they are, rather than shout, make a noise or break things, but to just observe rather than hit out, to just know that this is your not liking of a situation, but something is disturbing you sufficiently to feel a reaction coming on, but to settle and calm that reaction by the antidote of anger, which is loving kindness, metta. And if you don't have that initially for an aggressor or even yourself, something you do to annoy yourself is often a source of anger, then you can just have compassion, karuna. So these are the 4 Brahma Viharas I'm talking about here, excluding mudita, joy for others in this instance. But metta, loving kindness, karuna, compassion, and equanimity, upekkha, are the 3 antidotes to anger. Because with loving kindness and with compassion for those whom perhaps are performing actions which are even offensive, even causing you pain, physical pain, you can understand that they don't know that by causing you suffering, they are ultimately causing themselves greater suffering. Because they will wish and want to perhaps even do it again. Any acts upon these initial emotions to try and satisfy what is insatiable, unsatisfiable, are just adding fuel to the fire. So this kind of environment, smashing things up, is much like porn or a bar buying alcohol. You're adding fuel to the wanting. You're creating the actual cause of suffering, more so. You're adding fuel to the flames. So not a good idea. Don't go there. They will just make people more angry ultimately. I see you have a PayPal. You have PayPal. That's fine. May I ask you, why do you need money? Heard that monks not get in touch with money. Do you need it for your health insurance? There's another question about that as well, about donations via PayPal, that there is a link for PayPal. I did take it off once, but then people kept asking how could they donate. So I do not use money. I'm a monk. We do not use money. It's the 10th precept. In fact, specifically in the Vinaya, we don't touch gold or use gold or silver in transactions, because that was the currency in the time of the Buddha. But just simply, I don't use money. But there are costs sometimes, and these are met by your very kind online donations or contributions, which are dana. They're offered as a way of getting dana to me, because you can't offer me rice and food in my bowl if you're at some distance, you're not local, as the people here in the neighbouring villages and town do. If you want to offer something, large or small, it doesn't matter, it can be offered by that means. And as you say, or maybe it was the second comment, this is handled and dealt with by lay people, lay supporters. So we appoint trusted stewards, and that's how things, just like incidental costs like visa costs in different countries when you have to travel. I try to keep everything down to the very minimal as far as that's concerned. And having established myself here now, will not be required to travel, hopefully, very much now, so much as I have been, where I've been moving around for visa reasons in recent years, and also COVID issues. As for health, they also have gone towards helping with going to the local hospitals, and also when I've had injuries and such, to have surgery and things in the private hospitals here too, which are more geared up for foreigners. But more importantly, the reasoning behind that, because it's the same facilities really and the same doctors that you see. As a foreigner, it's better to use the private facilities, because then you're not taking up the valuable resources that are quite limited and should be left available to the local people that live here. They don't have such a thing as an NHS system. I think they all have to pay. But if you're, as a monk, you tend to be jumping the queue. They always want to push you in the front. They won't let you wait. And I do feel a little bit guilty about that. So I'm very happy that there are donations, because I've had a couple of occasions to be visiting hospitals and even stay in hospitals. I've had surgery here and in India. And I mean, one could say you could go to your own country for that, but it would be at much more considerable cost, because I'd have to get there, I'd have to fly there. And here it's so much cheaper than a flight home, even though we have the NHS there. Plus I'd also have to be in the UK for some time waiting for that. And private medical treatment in the UK is considerably more expensive. So yeah, we don't have health insurance though, as you mentioned there. But thankfully I'm very well looked after. It doesn't take much to keep me, and I don't have to get involved with the day-to-day sort of idea of finances, because there really aren't any. You ask, I mean, what do I need money for? Well, I don't need money actually for anything other than those formalities, which all can happen quite happily behind the scenes. I just usually have to put my ID to something, show something, maybe put a password in or press a few buttons or sign something, that's all. Somebody commented that the candle is close to the curtain. So these are not so much curtains. I put some robes I'm not using. They were offered quite nice robes, but they're for one reason or another, we only have one set of robes. So I gave a lot of spare robes that I've been offered to local temples here, and some that weren't packaged or wrapped, I may have opened them or something to have a look. They were there, so I hung them in the corners because I thought it just softened the edges of the rooms up, so they're very much just for aesthetic purposes. And also you can pull them along if you need to have a background. Not that I really get involved with that, I just thought maybe I need to change the background occasionally if I can't go outside, I don't know. But anyway, the candle is, I've checked it, I've tested it, it is sufficiently distant. It's a very small candle and not much heat comes up. I put my hand over the top and it doesn't burn my hand, so I don't think it's going to burn the candle. But I do keep an eye on it, and I can't really move it because it has to be in that corner, as does the curtain or the piece of the robe hanging there. But thanks for your concern. Here in this is interesting. Here in the United States, a monk has no legal place to stay outside a monastery. Camping, sleeping is illegal in most places, as is begging for food. Until recently, arresting people just for being homeless didn't fly, but a recent Supreme Court decision has changed that. How could a monk live in the US without the patronage, or is it patronage? Patronage of a monastery. I'm legitimately considering trying to make it work despite the law, since monasteries are almost non-existent here in the US. Well, if you're already a monk, then you can make that work, because you can live, if you've been a monk for 5 years, you can live in a building, an empty building. I tried to live outside here because the climate is okay. There are plenty of empty spaces and beaches, but local people will not have any of that. They don't like to see a monk having that kind of amount of suffering. So they'll quickly come along and say, you can come and, as they did, live here in this empty building. We'll make it good for you and you stay here. But this is a Buddhist country, of course. But as monks, we can live in empty buildings, in cave, under trees. That's no good for you there. So it's sad that this is the kind of restrictions. But I think, as the world population grows and society changes, long gone are the days in countries like America and in Europe where you can, unless you're homeless, be homeless voluntarily. I was homeless in the UK during the COVID time because I went just for a quick visit, but then got stranded because of COVID, and they really did try to house me. But I said, no, I really insist I want to stay in this van. But because I'm a British citizen and I was probably 50 or over the age of 50. Yeah, so I was over the age of 50. They said, we can get you housing and this and that and the other, but it wouldn't have been appropriate, and I was leaving the country anyway. So they allowed me to stay in my van, but it was difficult even there without any specific legislation against it. So I appreciate what you're saying, and it's sad. Now, if you are already a monk, then if you have been a monk for 5 years, then you can go and live independently of your sangha, your teacher, your monastery where you were ordained. Up until then, you're normally living in a monastery anyway, under that patronage. If you're not already a monk, then you have to do that in order to become a monk. If you just want to practice, then that's up to you. Then you can still live where you live now, but you're going to have associated costs with that. You can reduce the costs dramatically. I went through a progression of reducing my housing costs down to the bare minimum, eventually to living in a van for 3 years in the UK. Whether you can do that, I doubt very easily where you are there. So if you are already a monk thinking of going back to the US and staying a monk there, then you'd have to find, I don't know, an empty building. That's going to be difficult. But if that's the case, then you stay in the monastery where you're at. And this is the purpose of monasteries. It doesn't really matter so much where you live. It's what you're doing where you're living that is important. It is following the Noble Eightfold Path. Whether you're as a lay person or as a monk, you can do that as intensively as you wish. Even monks living in monasteries mightn't necessarily practice that intensively. They may have other duties that they prefer to do. There may be maintenance, they may be teaching, they may be cleaning, making something, maybe just doing ceremonies and lots of pujas and chanting and blessings. But there are a few monks who just want to meditate. There's usually room for you in most monasteries. They'll make space available for you to do that and be relatively undisturbed. As long as you're firm at the outset that that's your intention, and you don't ask anything extra of them to support that, which you're not. You're asking for less, perhaps reducing, having just 1 meal a day when they're probably having 2. They're having breakfast and lunch. When I lived in the monastery in India, where I was ordained, I still only had 1 meal. So I was reducing my draw on their resources. In fact, I slept on the floor, so I used none of their bedding linen, created no extra cleaning duties for them, but I still had to stay in a room within the monastery. So how can you live in the USA? You say there are very few monasteries. Well, there are a few. You might have to travel. It's a big country, but India's just as big, and there aren't very many Buddhist monasteries in India either. But I was able to usually find some, but there, of course, I could just sleep outside. Or indeed go to a different country. But then it's difficult. You have these associated hurdles and obstacles. I was determined to go to Thailand for training, but I was in a monastery. I've been in monasteries of one form or another for many, many years before I was able to take what I learned and that practice and employ it on the outside alone. It takes a lot of practice before you're able to do that successfully, because you won't get the support if you're not already practiced and having been a monk for some time. Because people, you need very little support, but you will get that. And unless you've got used to that in an environment whereby you're being looked after and supported, then you would be very much a fish out of water. It could be quite difficult. So, and then on the other thing with that is, I mean, I'm sure different towns, different cities, different places have varying bylaws and things. A lot of homeless people go into towns, city centres, for the protection of shops and environments, and also for the ease of collecting money. If you're a monk, then you're not needing to do that. You can go out into the countryside, into forests, into deep forests, into coastal areas where nobody goes. You can become invisible. That's what you can do. This monastic life allows us to do that, because after all, we don't have anything to do except blend into the scenery. for the whole day. And once you've been to get your meal, you don't actually even beg, you're not asking. So it doesn't come under begging, our asking for food. But if you build up a support network in a little village somewhere, I'm sure you have little villages or enclaves of people in towns, and there is a lot of Buddhism in the US, so you'll find it somehow or another, or it will find you. You'll never starve. And, you know, if the authorities insist on housing you, then, you know, so may it be, they house you. That's a good thing, isn't it, if you're a lay person? But if you're a monk, you know the rules already, so you don't need to ask. So I'm assuming you're not already a monk. Okay. Somebody's very interested in a Buddhist holy sites pilgrimage in India. It's on their bucket list, and will I ever consider doing such a tour with other people accompanying me? I haven't really given it much thought, not even really given it much thought as to whether I will go and visit those holy sites again. I have done so, all of them now, a few times, so it's probably not something I'll be doing in the future, foreseeable or otherwise, but one never knows, so keep watching this space. If enough people ask me to, and they want to organise it, I'll gladly accompany them and be able to tell them what's what. And in some places I know monasteries, but really only those where monks can stay. Although my own Sangha, we have a meditation centre in Bodh Gaya, but I think it's pretty well booked up with domestic interest, so Indian people going there most of the time. So this all gets into the realms of organising, planning, and doing things that I've really set aside now. I've endeavoured to try and find somewhere over these last few years where I can stop, settle, and just practice bhavana, as I was talking about in the last talk, the development of my parami, my qualities, from what I've learned through this experience so far. Sitting, stopping, and just letting it mature, letting it develop, establish itself. And we don't, any of us, have to go anywhere for that. Although the Buddha did say that it should be that people take these pilgrimages to these 4 holy sites, it could well have been interpreted also that those can be respected internally. One doesn't have to literally physically go there. So one can also these days very easily and more easily visually see these places and visit them on such formats as this, by watching YouTube videos or even on Google Earth, going in and zooming in and walking the little man along the street to see these places where the Buddha walked himself. Now that of course wasn't available to us even when I began with Buddhism so much, but let alone a long time ago. Nowadays one can do that. And this pilgrimage to those places is quite a hectic experience. With a group, it's always more difficult than as a single person, and especially as a single monk who's sleeping outside and doesn't have to worry about eating so much. With lay people, it can be quite difficult. You'll see at these places many coaches of people doing just this. And I often look at it and think, wow, I feel very sorry for them. It looks very difficult and not really in the spirit of it. If you can do it on your own, I'd really strongly encourage you to do that. It's so much easier, not even with one other person, actually completely on your own. I truly believe that's the best way to visit these holy sites and to do any pilgrimage, and that is on your own. Even the other pilgrimages people do, the religious pilgrimages around the world, I think so much better to be done alone, for whatever purpose they are, because your focus is then on what you're doing, what you're seeing. The minute you're with someone else, your focus is going to be, as a compassionate person with metta, loving kindness, on the people around you as well. Now, it might seem selfless, but it defeats the object of going to the place and the purpose of what you're going to the place for. So if you can do it alone, do it alone, and it's much easier that way. But if ever it comes up, then I'd give it consideration. Right, in the Vinaya it says that monks are not allowed to own money. Oh, that's the same question, but it's a different question. So how are you accepting money through donations? Is it a lay follower running that? Yes, so I mean, I'm not actually accepting money. The money, it comes in. I don't ask for donations here or put a button especially, but there is a link in the channel description or some description part of it that you can click, and it sends. You can send money to an account which then is dealt with. So as I've just described. So that's how. It doesn't involve me actually receiving money. So many people here offer me money in the morning when I'm on Pindapata, and I have to say no, and they get very excited that I say no. Some quite are a bit, negative, because that's quite an easy way of giving, isn't it? And for them, and I say, well, actually, we don't actually touch or use or handle money, which with the language barrier can be different, but always there's someone nearby who runs over and says, no, this monk, in their language, this monk, he doesn't ever touch money or use money. And they just point him to go up there and buy him a bun or some rice or something like this. So then they can go and take their 100 rupees and they can buy lots of buns for that. So they realize they can just buy one very cheap 10 rupee bun and put that in my bowl, and I will accept that. So everyone's very happy when they realize that I'm not using, accepting and handling money. And this works because this is how you generate that continued support. They know that they can always find a tiny little bit of something to put food-wise in your bowl each day. They don't have to worry about if they've got enough money or anything like that. So it's a very lovely way to live. Or maybe I... Okay, that seems very difficult, that question. Now, my wife and I always have had an incredibly strong feeling that our souls will be connected somehow forever, even after eternity. Some spiritual experience we have shared have only strengthened this belief. I find it very difficult to completely open up to Buddhism when the ultimate goal is to depart from each other into a state of emptiness or reincarnation, at which point we would be separated. I guess this could be described as a state of suffering or attachment we have for each other, but our connection never feels bad, only good. It's one impermanence we don't want to accept or actively support. Is there any place in Buddhism for a belief that souls could be connected indefinitely? Maybe we have misunderstood I've missed the end of that, but I think that's it. Yes, well, of course, I mean, especially coming from a theistic background where there are marriage ceremonies where we marry for life and then hope to be together in heaven. There is this understanding, this belief, but it is belief, it is just that. But we teach in Buddhism that we will be parted from those that we love as they will be parted from us. And there is no actual spiritual connection in that sense that will continue after this life. Rebirth, not reincarnation, into another life is that which happens so many times, let's just say infinite amount of times, or incalculable, not a number we can say, count or work out. The likelihood is we meet the same people time and time again through different lifetimes, as well as the likelihood that we might never do so again because of the random nature of this, because of the sheer numbers we're talking about in terms of how many existences there actually have been. But sometimes a strong bond, spiritual bond, feeling, relationship with another being, whether it be someone you in a relationship with by way of marriage, or whether friendship, or fellow monks in a sangha, or even a relationship with a dog or a cat or a goldfish, could be fueled by a previous life's connection, and therefore seem more of a bond. You may seem more drawn to a certain type of person. This is very much evidence of past lives and the very fact of rebirth. But there is no assurance that I can give you, sadly, that you will meet up with your current soulmate in a future rebirth. But that by being free from rebirth, there won't be suffering as a result of that, as there will not be suffering for them. So out of compassion you can, and loving kindness, metta, which we still hold very strongly in Buddhism for all beings and each other, and especially in these valuable relationships, you can wish that that partner also becomes free from suffering, as you will too with this practice. So this is the difference between wanting to cling to samsara and experience rebirth into, if you're lucky, the human realm, into this time where there are the teachings of the Buddha, the Dharma, available to us. But if this continues beyond that, you may experience many rebirths when the Dharma isn't so evident. It may not become apparent. These simple Four Noble Truths may be forgotten. You don't know which realm you might be reborn into. But what fuels this rebirth is the desire, attachment. It doesn't mean this relationship, this desire, this attachment to another, a partner, and the Buddha, whilst he doesn't speak of relationships and marriage specifically encouraging them, he doesn't say that they're negative states, but in fact encourages, with the third precept, faithfulness and devotion within a relationship, whether it be monogamous or otherwise, but mutually beneficial, faithful relationships are important. They form the lay practitioners, the upasakas and upasikas, whom have, through these relationships, procreation, continued the species. Monks, nuns will not produce new monks and nuns other than by ordination. Lay people have to produce them. So if you have children, your devotion to each other will live on through them. If you don't, your devotion to one another will remain in whomever lasts the longest in samsara. And your paths may cross again, and inevitably they will, until you're free from the cycle of rebirth. Okay, I think I have to make this probably the last question. Is wisdom a kind of intuitive grasping, like an aha moment when the light bulb of the mind flashes on? And what if that light bulb stays on and shines on the ignorance? Is that a kind of wisdom one should want? So I don't think I understand the question, but I have just spoken exactly on that subject. So whether this comes as a result of perhaps me not explaining quite clearly that wisdom in the sense of Panya is establishing, developing right view, samadhi, the first step of the Noble Eightfold Path, but also the culmination of the practice, keeping moral virtue, practicing meditation, developing wholesome mind states, reducing unwholesome mind state, results in right view. But it is a developing of this understanding, developing right view. To some extent it can come in a flash, but it can also be developed. It isn't a light. Enlightenment is a word to describe that of being awakened, seeing clearly, seeing the truth. Light meaning, if it's dark we can't see well, if it's light we can. No actual light bulb moment. So whilst it can be in one moment, it can also be over many lifetimes of developing all of these qualities necessary to be fully enlightened, awakened to the truth. So right view is a full understanding of the Four Noble Truths and the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path, a full appreciation and understanding of karma and the results of karma, vipaka, a full understanding and appreciation of the nature of rebirth and this cycle we're trapped in samsara, through our own actions of body, speech and mind, our own karma, that we are responsible for solely creating those causes and conditions for that rebirth, that cycle. Now that wisdom is just that, that knowledge, which is not difficult intellectually to understand, but only known when you put it into practical use. When fear is ahead of you and you're no longer scared, you know something's bad, but you accept it for the way it is. The doctor tells you you will be dying of cancer in 5 months. It's just that. You remain equanimous. You still have loving kindness for yourself, compassion for yourself, but you remain equanimous because you know we get old, we get sick, we die. This is wisdom I'm referring to. So I don't know whether that answers your question, that I wasn't very sure I understood, but that's what I was talking about when it comes to Panya, wisdom. Find a quick short one. Okay. So I have a valuable question that I haven't been able to find anyone to answer. What happens when a Buddhist monk gets sick, like a virus, a cold, or food poisoning? So exactly the same as what happens when someone who is not a Buddhist monk gets sick with a virus, a cold, or food poisoning. It's the same. We have 4 requisites that are supplied to us by lay people, which are robes, shelter, food and medicine. In fact, the order is normally food, robes, shelter, medicine. So we require food every day, really. We can skip a day or two, but we require food every day. The robes we require for modesty and protection of our skin and protection to others from our skin. And of course, shelter, if it's inclement weather, we can't sleep outside, we require this. And also medicine. Now, depending on where you are, this medicine will be of varying degrees of complexity. But actually, healthcare is pretty much the same and has always been the same with regards to general health issues. So it may be a little bit more of an Ayurvedic nature in India and parts of Asia than perhaps the more pharmaceutical world of the West. But Panadol, headache pills, such like paracetamol for temperatures, is generally available to monks worldwide these days. Hospital care I've already just spoken of, so I think we've covered that. So the answer to your question is it's just the same as everyone else. And if we're alone, completely alone, without support, then we just get ill and it passes. We are understanding that we get old, we get sick and die. I can't tell you how many times I've had food poisoning since I've been here. Many times. But you get used to it. It's mainly because of our sensitive, even though I've been away from England for many years now, I'm used to different food in different countries. But every time you move, even regionally within a country, your tummy has to adapt. So maybe it's food poisoning, or maybe it's just your body acclimatizing. But you can feel quite unwell, but you know it will pass. There's nothing to be done. It's just being with that in the body feeling and experiencing that as the present moment. So on that note, I hope these comments, or my comments in reply to your comments and questions, are useful. If so, use them please, or just let them go. Until next time, be happy and stay well. Sukhi Hotu.